Hey buddy, welcome back to another episode of How AI is Built. Today we have another very special guest. Jonathan Yarkoni is the founder of Reach Latent. He specializes in helping companies extract value from unstructured data by analyzing millions of documents and extracting the key information.
We prefer the hard problems and that we work with minimal guidance. Now, what companies this would be most beneficial to are companies that are looking to increase productivity. More to point, companies that have a lot of textual data, such as contracts, documents, and or are looking to do automations. That's where we shine using Gen AI to kind of uh, do those automations or processes.
Yeah, and you already said like you thrive on hard problems. Could you maybe give like one or two examples? What were like the gnarliest problems you have tackled yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think that the place we love being is actually coming to companies who maybe have already tried to solve that problem on their own, and for some reason have kind of not given up because they're still looking to solve the problem, but have kind of exhausted all possible paths internally, and then it's very ripe for like discussion. They know where they want to get, they know what they've tried and maybe hasn't worked or has partially worked, and we're kind of tasked with taking it to the next level. um some of like the hardest problems we've worked on are ones that companies kind of want to stay incognito, but I'll still give like an example of those. um we had a company who was working on weather prediction, and they were trying to figure out anomalies of very rare weather events so that they could go on and sell that data. Now, the nature of weather data is it's hard, it's unpredictable. You need a lot of subject matter expertise, and you also need to employ a lot of interesting strategies, such as handling skew in the data. And that was a really long process of really getting their data and doing the necessary data cleaning and sitting with the subject matter expert from their side, extracting all of the information, translating it into what we already have, what we need. um, we also went through a longer process of like recommending them to acquire external data sources that we found, um, and eventually develop a model. Initially, a very simple model using like linear regression and decision trees and stuff like that. And later down the line, after a couple of months and successful projects, diving into deep learning and really taking it to the next level. So that's one of the, I think, the hardest projects that we have, but also like the most interesting one.
Would you actually? It sounds really like this process diagram you have in like AI, which is like business understanding, data modeling, and then like the training part and then feedback. Do you have like a fixed process and how you break down new projects, or is it like different depending on who and what you're working on?
Um, we have an overall framework, but we don't believe it's like a one size fits all. Some people are looking, you know, for us to take everything and be the drivers on the process. So we allow ourselves to cut a lot of corners. And other people, for instance, really want to be involved and feel like they're in control. And we understand that, which is why we switch it up a bit. The other aspect of that is the nature of the problem. Not all problems require you to do a data collection, a data cleaning process, stuff like that. Some projects, especially generative AI projects, um, the fact that you have data, the models are very tolerant to dirty data. And if the objective of the company is, you know, doing something within a limited time frame, or if just performance isn't as important, maybe we can just skip the data cleaning and do that. So we have a framework. We use, I think, the best standards of like sitting with the stakeholders, doing a data collection process, understanding the data, cleaning the data, working with a sample data set, training a model, and so on and so forth. But um, the point in case is that we we don't go through all the steps for the sake of going through all the steps. We try to do the minimum necessary steps in order to have a successful project. And a successful project a lot of the time means generating a model, supplying companies with an API, or figuring out whatever they were trying to do.
How do you, I'm really curious about that. How do you ensure like the success after the project? Like, especially nowadays as the data is shifting and also like new models come out, new models of like GPT-4 or the other generative models come out. Do you take on new projects or do you build in like automatic updates, retraining into your delivery?
Great question. Um, Models, as you said, are constantly evolving, and new models are constantly being released, and I expect this to be the case for at least the next 2 years to come. We definitely work in that environment, and we take it into account. We tell customers to be very cognizant of what's out there, and to develop in relation to what's out there. And that is both like what other companies maybe are building a SaaS product that you can simply adopt. Yeah. If somebody's building the exact same thing as a SaaS product and they already have an MVP running, you might not want to use an MVP, but you got to think, if it's going to take you 3 months to do the project, where will they be in 3 months? So that's the first thing. And we see it as our job to not only take everything towards like a custom development, but also to recommend the customer, this component, maybe you want to leverage a third party provider. And when we do hands-on development, which is again most of what we do on a day-to-day, build custom solutions, we take it into account. We take it into account both that models will be changing over time, and also we take it into account that uh, maybe if your problem is almost solvable, it will probably look very much different in 3 to 4 months time, when new models come, when more specific models are released. uh, so on the one hand, we prefer always starting with the best model, especially when we're doing a proof of concept. On the other hand, we're very cognizant of the fact that if you have constraints such as privacy or security, or cost constraints, and you want to use one of the smaller models, let's say Mistral, which we found to have a lot of success with, that's okay. Those models are going to be better over time. In terms of constantly monitoring and retraining, monitoring, yes, definitely. We put things in place. Automatically retraining generative AI applications, um, not so much. There's a bit too much that ties into a comprehensive, robust solution, um, for it to be easily retrainable. You always want to add more data. Yes, if you're doing things such as RAG, you can update the database and it will still work. Switching the model in an automatic fashion, the way that it was done with deep learning and is still done nowadays, um, not yet the case with generative AI. It's still very much a question of how you actually evaluate models. And until we figure that out, and until there are good standards for evaluation of models, we're not going to be automatically retraining and switching.
I'm not even sure we will reach a point where we have like fixed standards because it's so use case specific when we are talking about like we most often are generating text. So we have to evaluate them from a perspective of the use case. The the ChatGPT moment especially, how do you actually see that impacting the AI space in general or at large?
That's a great question. I think ChatGPT had two major impact. First of all, it became a commonplace to think about adopting this technology. People are highly familiarized with something that was rather niche just a year and a half ago. The second thing is that in turn, it made everybody work on problems in AI. Yeah. VCs saw that it's hyped, invested money, And now we have a lot of companies working on this, aside from academia, even though the main drivers of the technology are actually not academia, it's actually private companies. I think we've only just seen the tip of the iceberg. Um, I'll give an example of like the way I think it unfolds. So to give like a tangible examples, like let's take agents, which is all the rage right now in terms of the latest capabilities of AI. Uh, Agents came out as a concept in mid 2023. People started building agents, then LangChain created an abstraction for building agents. Different type of agents were created and ways to use them, and VCs caught up to it. People like me and you came and pitched like, oh, we're going to build the next agent definition company. They got funded, they hired people, and now they're working on it. And you have great companies like Crew AI, which are like building a specific project for definition. And LangGraph just came out like 2 months ago. We haven't yet seen a fleshed out project which was built with these like new companies. And the way I see adoption happening is in waves. I think we're going to see another wave in 2024 and another one in 2025. Um, People got familiarized. That's kind of the wave of 2023. 2024 is probably still going to be a lot of internal use cases because it's a low risk environment and there's a lot of opportunity to be had. I spoke about this and we'll probably speak about this a bit later. A lot of the projects we do are internal, like process automation and search systems and chat systems and support systems. All of those are not customer facing, and the obvious driver for that is there are still problems with the models, the fact that they talk off topic or the fact that they hallucinate. In 2025, I see like another adoption wave coming post all of the success stories of 2024 and the fact that the models have evolved and things such as hallucinations are not as much of a problem. We're probably going to graduate to a next level.
Yeah, I think especially on the hallucination front, like on the one hand of like applications which are especially like more B2C, like Midjourney and stuff, the hallucinations are a feature and not a bug. And for the other stuff, we're seeing actually more and more interesting like structured generation libraries, which are really enforcing constraints through regex, through state machines, and other interesting concepts. Nice. And what industries or domains do you think are most ripe for disruption by especially generative AI?
Okay, so I'm gonna give a list. I'm gonna try and not name all industries. Uh, the ones which I think are most ripe for disruption by AI are ones which are heavy text right now. Text model have made a leap. There is a lot of investment that has gone into it. They're at the point where they're ready to be used. I say this kind of as opposed to diffusion models, which are great, but have only recently just made the leap where they can be used in production, and even that mostly for specific use cases. Um, there's a lot that will be in the future. So just to recap, text-heavy industries are ripe: legal, education, software engineering, marketing. Another, which I think there's a lot of noise in, and it makes sense, is biotech. You've probably seen most of the interesting results as of lately, generating new proteins with all kinds of unique functionality. Uh, that's probably going to have another impact. And soon thereafter, once the fusion models really mature, and mature is a couple of things. First of all, we had to have hyperrealism, which I think really only came about with Midjourney V6, which I don't remember, but it's like 3-4 months ago. Um, and now we have to make them adhere to style, and I think that will have a large impact on the entertainment industry, because the entertainment industry has to be hyper realistic. It has to be controlling the style because you have your own brand if you're creating a game, and obviously things such as video generation, everything happening with Sora and all of its competitors. It's going to impact gaming and content generation at large. I love to think about this idea of where this is going. And one thing I think is imminent is Netflix on demand, like a hyper personalized Netflix on demand. You're just going to be sitting in front of the TV. And I don't know, I think it's 3 to 4 or 5 years. I have my Twitter, I have a thread that I constantly follow up and update. I think in 3 to 4 years from now, you're going to be sitting in front of the television, and and you're going to be able to say, "Oh, I really want to see another Game of Thrones season." But you're not going to wait until HBO starts producing it and selling it to Netflix, because that's the subscription that you're subscribed to currently. You're just going to be able to tell the machine, I want another episode of How I Met Your Mother. I really like this series in the 90s, Seinfeld. Make me another 11th season. I don't understand why they stopped at 10th. I don't agree with Seinfeld. It's not, stop at the peak. Give me more content.
I hope I can also take like the last season of Game of Thrones out of the context window, so I don't have to continue with that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, especially I think like it sounds like it's still rather on the B2C side. I think like in biotech, it's challenging to get like an external view on that, whether what's actually happening behind the scenes, because it's such a intransparent industry, and I would love to actually see more or have a better peer into that industry, what's actually happening and what's being tried. But I think in biotech, it's like the output always has to go through like several additional steps to actually really validate it, as opposed to like images and text I'm generating. Like nearly everyone can be a judge of that.
For sure. Just, seeing how long it's taken CRISPR technology to mature. It's not only about the technology, it's not only about productionizing it. Yes, at the end of the day, bringing something to market in biotech takes exponentially longer than software.
And looking at Gen AI especially, but maybe even before that, like also AI solutions, how do you actually balance delivering like immediate results and like developing cutting edge, more like research heavy solutions? Because often it's like tricky, especially if you're working for external clients.
That's a great question. I think, like, at heart, we always want to work on the cutting edge and experiment as much as possible, which is why we like taking like hard problems. Uh, but on the other hand, delivery is like a core value for us, so we don't take this lightly. What we do in order to balance is we try to frame everything as a cost value proposition and really involve the customer in the decision making process. So when we work with customers, a lot of the times we have syncs on and a good cadence, which normally means once a week or sometimes even twice a week. And there we try to constantly evolve the cost value metrics and to plan with the customer. So we'll say things like, listen, after we've run some tests and we've seen some preliminary results, we think there are two paths that you can take. One, we're able to invest 2 weeks, use simplistic models and known methods, and we'll probably reach a good point. Or we can take a month and a half, try something really cutting edge, involve some really new techniques, uh, but it's a risk. It might not succeed more than the simple method. It might not succeed at all. And so ultimately, we constantly explore cutting edge and experimental techniques, but it's mostly when the customer is willing to take the risk.
Especially like with agents, this is like my pet peeve with agents. You never can tell whether they actually work reliably on any use case. And often if you use them and they work really well in some situations, and then they are complete garbage in others.
Yeah, to that I'll say that we build things incrementally. I don't think we've ever like tried to develop something with an agent and had to sack it at the end of the day. Uh, I will say that you never know how far you can go with agents. So, you start from the basic, and you start from prompting, and eventually you graduate at the end of the day to working with agent. And there's a lot that can be done there, especially like the multi-agent paradigm that's kind of up and about right now. So I've never had to really sack an agent, but yeah, they can be unreliable at times.
Did you decide to not go with an agent, like not sacking because of performance, but rather because the performance cost trade off wasn't really there?
So no, because of performance. Yes, because of cost. I mean, you know how agents work, but at the end of the day, they go through a couple of steps. They plan and then they execute, and when they execute, they can also verify and they can react on it, and basically repeatedly make requests to the same LLMs. And you do control it to some extent, but it's not as a clear cut when you work with, let's say, a RAG pipeline. You know exactly how many steps, you know exactly how many requests to an LLM are going to be made. It so we have It has happened to us once in the past that, like, yes, the agent was working pretty well, but they had to make so many like requests in order to make it work that the unit economics didn't make sense at the end of the day.
Yeah. And because you mentioned it before, like the cost and value drivers, beyond like time saved, what value drivers do you see with Gen AI?
There are a lot. Um, yes, productivity and time saving is a great uh, opportunity that Gen AI offers. Um, Aside from that, you were basically able to do things that you weren't able to before. We now have these LLM models, and the main thing that they have is higher reasoning capabilities. So suddenly you can put systems at the tip of the finger that just weren't there before. And yes, initially it's a time save. Like if I can have an automatic system like searching over all the corpus in 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 my company so that you can get the answer on the fly. So you say, oh, well, a human would have had to read a million documents and then only figure out the answer. So that's a time accelerant, but not really. I mean, that's just something that you couldn't do before. Like the human couldn't read all the documents and probably couldn't find the answer. So that's kind of creating new value out of scratch. It's not a time saver. It's something that you weren't able to do before, and now you can.
Yes. And looking at the generative AI space, like with all the different use cases you've already implemented, what is actually missing from the space? Like, what would you love to see implemented, either as closed source, like as a managed service, but also as open source?
Um, so, I mean, I think I'm very much keen on the progression that's out there right now. I'd like to see more, I'd like to see better open source models. I'd like to see better small models, and I'd like to see better task specific models. So that's at a high level, like three resources that I'd like to be out there. I think ultimately at the end of the day, having more open source models is going to drive the industry as a whole. It's going to make us better understand how the models operate. Smaller models are just good because they run faster and they're cheaper. And task specific really feels like the way to go for me. At the end of the day, um, this comes from economics, but markets specialize, and the same thing applies here. Another thing which I'd really like to see, which is not so much a resource that we'd be getting, but more a framework for better planning. I think agents are getting there. There's a lot of discussion right now, like what is actually planning? How does good planning look like? Um, so that's like those are like the four things I'd like to see.
Yeah. And I always like to say it's like I think AI data is like it's a game of earned knowledge. So it's so many different tricks, hacks, little configurations you can set to actually squeeze like the last few percent of accuracy and performance out of it. What are like the little
Oh,
tricks and hacks you have picked up in all your projects that you now use like almost instantly from the get-go?
first of all, like you said that and immediately made me think about like prompt engineering. Like we get this asked this question so much, like, okay, you know, you do so many projects, you have obviously done a lot of prompt engineering, like tell me how. Like I've had actually like consultation sessions, like log on to the Zoom and tell me, okay, like now teach me how you guys do prompt engineering. And I think to some extent, yes, it's like a lot of concepts that you have to adhere to and know. And also, like, you know, practice makes perfect. But it's also made out of so many like little tips and tricks, and you have to use a chain of thought and you have to know how the model reacts to some things. Um, and I think a lot of like tips and tricks are like in the world of prompt engineering, stuff like, you know, uh, using the hack of like simple chain of thought, just think this out step by step, or using emotional stimuli like saying my job depends on it, or actually using ChatGPT to revise and critique my prompts. That's a great hack. You write a prompt, you think it's good, but it's probably disorganized and probably has some ambiguity in it. And if you tell ChatGPT, like, you know, review my prompt, it's able to do that. Organize my prompt, it's able to do that. It's able to do a lot of things. Um, Also, try to, as a rule of thumb, over overuse ChatGPT in your day to day. Like I create content, I create project plans, I create blog posts every now and then. Obviously, I'm going to use ChatGPT. It's not because I'm trying to game the system. It's the new way of working. Don't be, you know, I also tell this to companies that we work with, that they should really encourage the workforce to adopt the technology, rather than kind of uh, penalize people for using it. What do you think, if you have to go and write a project management plan today? Let's say it's not something you've done a million times in the past. Uh, don't you think ChatGPT has some kind of sense and have seen quite a lot of like project management plans and can probably start from a better point than you? You know, learn how to work with the system, give it guidance. I promise you from like personal experience, as somebody, yes, I used to be a team lead in various companies, but I wasn't a project manager, and I'm not used to like, you know, writing 6, 7, or even longer pages of project management, you know, detailing everything. But working with ChatGPT, you can get some pretty impressive results, and it helps.
And maybe as a closing question, what is for one like your dream tech stack at the moment for generative AI? And what is also something you would have to add to the tech stack? Like what is a wish you have?
So there are a lot of things that we use right now when we're developing Gen AI. Just to like throw a couple of them out there: instructor guardrails, semantic routing, DSPY, LangChain, Llama Index, LangGraph, um, uh, things such as obviously GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 that we heavily rely on. One thing I'm really looking forward to is more evaluation stacks. Yes, there's open evals by OpenAI, and there's Ragas, which is an open source framework which we rather like for chat applications, and then there are things, third party providers such as Vellum and Trace Loops, which are also great because they have like aspects of no code, low code, which really allow you to constantly evaluate and monitor, and probably in the future also take action based on stuff like that. And I think we spoke about this like in the beginning. It's a great closing question. Um, to really get to production reliably, we have to have these tools evolve further, and get more standardized so people can still use the old ways of doing production with the new technology.
Yeah, I think I had the founders of Ragas on in episode 5, and they just also released a new model for generating synthetic data sets to test RAG stacks, which is really interesting. And they also, I think, they built it on a Quen model, a really small one, I think like 1.7 billion parameters. And I tried it on a weekend, and it works really well.
So one really interesting use case, or more like it was interesting how we chose to make progress on that. We're working with a security oriented customer. They sell software to governments, and they wanted the ability to query all of the data they collect in free text. Now they have certain things that they're like trying to identify, and obviously they help governments kind of mitigate security risks. So they're looking for stuff like, if somebody is planning something malicious on the internet, or makes a post and stuff like that and insinuates something bad, um, they want to be able to catch it. And they want to allow analysts to use the system in free text. Now, that's great, and it's loosely defined, but we can work with that. Like we're game for working with minimal guidance. However, there was a problem of acquiring data, because working with governments and even municipalities and stuff like that, they're not so quick to give their data for training. They're happy to adopt your system, but you're still going to have to uh, produce it on your own. What we thought of, or rather, my partner had this brilliant idea. Let's use synthetic data. We've done it in the past. We've done it a lot with image generation. We had some interesting medical customer way back when, where synthetic data was beneficial. Uh, but we really had to get started quickly here. So he had the brilliant idea of taking non-IP licensed, um, copyrighted books, mystery books, which revolve around potentially harmful events, and just trying to work with that data and figuring out if we could, catch all of the times where either malicious conversation was taking place, or an insinuation of a malicious conversation was taking place. And that was great. We took it all the way to production at the initial system, and then later on we allowed them to train with their own data on local servers and everything. But synthetic data allowed us to get that project up and running within a month, and like 2 months in, they were already able to deploy it on a customer's environment.
Nice. And what were like the things you used to generate the synthetic data? Can you go into like some detail?
Most of the times now we adhere to the best practice, which is using the strongest model in order to create the synthetic data. And right now the strongest model is GPT-4, with Claude probably being runner up and good at specific use cases. So we use a very strong model in order to create the synthetic data. Um, if it's really at scale, we might consider other models, probably ChatGPT 3.5 to create the data. Pretty good, pretty easy, very easy to automate, very easy to get the amount of data that you need.
And what filters did you use to actually filter out bad examples from the created dataset?
Great. So first of all, we're like fan of Ragas, and there's a concept like of aspect critique, and you can also like create a custom metric, which we're very much fond of. You can create your own definition of like what is good or bad, and have other frameworks such as like Ragas score it for you. I'll give an example. Let's say you created a lot of data which you intend to use to summarize niche topics in chemistry. You go and you create a lot of data, and there are a couple of metrics that you can see. There are a couple of metrics that you can measure to see if these synthetic examples are good or bad. One of them, in the context of summary, will be, was the key data kind of retained in the summary? Another one would just be flat out like, is it a summary? Is the output string shorter than the input string? If not, it's definitely not a good example because it's basically not a summary. Now, this is a rudimentary example, but that's what we do at large. We create the data, and then we use, like, most of the times, either ragas or ragas together with like a custom metric in order to figure out. And it's not perfect, but the world doesn't revolve around perfect. It revolves around like value.
Perfect. And if people feel inspired and want to get in contact with you to build an AI solution, or they just want to follow you, where can they do that?
Yeah. So first of all, if people have, if they want to work with us, if they want our either development services or consulting services, we're obviously happy to jump on a call and figure out where there's value to be had. If they want to reach to us, I'm available on LinkedIn always. Jonathan Yarkoni. You could easily find me on LinkedIn. The other place is if you want to reach out directly by mail, it's info@reachlatent.com, which coincidentally is also our website, www.reachlatent.com.